I almost didn't leave that house alive. I'm pretty sure of that. I've been turning it over for 2 years, and I keep ending up in the same place. There's a version of that weekend where I stay on the couch. There's a version where I don't hear what I heard. There's a version where two men come down a dirt road and find what they were expecting to find when they got there. I'm only here because I went out the back door. This was about 2 years ago. I was 19, home from my first semester of college, sleeping in my old bedroom and eating my mom's cooking, and generally feeling like a kid again, in a way I didn't really mind. About a week into break, I got a message on Instagram from a girl I went to high school with. Her name was Megan. We had a little over 300 kids in our graduating class, and Megan was one of them. That was the entire extent of our relationship up to that point. I want to be honest about her. We never spoke once in 4 years of high school, not in a class, not at a party, not in a hallway. She existed somewhere in my peripheral vision, the way a lot of people do when you're 17 and the world is full of girls you're never actually going to talk to. She had brown hair, and she ran cross-country, and she had a laugh I remember hearing at lunch a few times. That's it. That's everything I knew about her. She'd added me on Instagram the summer after graduation, like everybody added everybody else, and I'd accepted, like everybody accepted, and then nothing ever happened. For a year and a half, she was just a name in my followers list. Then, in December, she sent me a message. The message was casual. It said, "Hey, it had been forever. What was I up to? Did I want to come up and hang out with her at her uncle's place over the weekend? He was out of town, and she was house-sitting, and the mountains were beautiful. No pressure either way." I read it 4 times. I read it to my roommate over FaceTime. I read it again the next morning to make sure it still said what I thought it said. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I'd thought she was beautiful when I was 17 and I'd never spoken to her once, and now she was inviting me up to a cabin for the weekend. I don't think there's a 19-year-old in America who says no to that message. I didn't even ask her where the place was. I just asked when. The drive was 4 hours. We met at a Sheetz off the interstate, and she was already there when I pulled in, leaning against her truck with a coffee. She gave me a hug that lasted about a second longer than I was expecting, and told me to leave my car around back of the gas station. The owner wouldn't care. It'd be safer back there than the front lot for a couple nights. Then she drove. We were on pavement for maybe 40 minutes, then on gravel for a while, then on dirt. The radio went out somewhere on the gravel, and she didn't bother to find another station. My phone lost service at some point I didn't notice, and by the time I checked, the little no service icon had a kind of permanent look to it. I asked her how far back her uncle's place was. She said, "Pretty far back." I asked if there were neighbors, and she said, "Sort of, but you couldn't see them." I asked her how long her uncle had owned the place, and she said he hadn't. His dad had, and the dad before that. She said it like she'd been asked that question before. I remember thinking it was sweet, family land, going back generations. I remember thinking it was nice that she was the one watching it for him. The road kept going, the trees got taller. We crossed a small wooden bridge over a creek, and she didn't slow down for it, even though there was no guardrail and the boards rattled when we drove over. After the bridge, the road climbed for a while, and then leveled off, and then we were there. The house was a 2-story farmhouse at the end of the road, where the road just kind of stopped. There was no other place for it to go. It had a tin roof, a wraparound porch with a couch on it that had been rained on, and white paint that wasn't really white anymore. Trees came right up to the porch railing on 3 sides. The 4th side, where the road came in, was the only open space, and even that had been losing ground to the brush for a while. She killed the engine. The sound of the truck went away, and what was left was just silence. No road noise, no engines off in the distance, nothing at all. I remember thinking, okay, this is what it's supposed to be like. This is what people pay good money for. She got out and went up the porch and lifted up a rock next to the door. The key was under the rock. I caught up to her on the porch, and she was already turning the lock, and I noticed 2 things at once. The first thing was that the house was warm. I could feel it through the open door. Not warm like the sun had been on the front of the house all afternoon. It was warm the way a house is warm when somebody had a stove going pretty recently. The second thing was the boots. There were 2 pairs of men's boots on the mat by the door. One pair was bigger than the other. Megan walked past them like they were furniture, said, "Come on in," and dropped her keys in a bowl on a side table that was already half full of keys. I stood in the doorway with my bag on my shoulder and looked at the boots for what was probably half a second, but felt longer than that. Then I looked at the coats hung above them on the wall. There were 3 coats. One of them was a Carhartt that was sized for someone my age. I told myself I was being weird about it. Her uncle had friends. People leave coats places. Megan had said her uncle was 60, and one of these coats was for a younger man. So what? 60-year-old men have nephews. 60-year-old men have buddies who come up to hunt. 60-year-old men live in a world that includes other people. I was the one being strange. I was nervous because I was alone with a girl I didn't really know in a house I'd never been in, and I was looking for things to be wrong about because that was easier than dealing with what I'd actually come up there to figure out, which was whether or not she liked me. That's what I told myself. I walked in and put my bag down. The inside of the house was nice. Wood floors that had been worn down to a soft shine in the doorways. A wood stove in the corner of the front room with a pile of split logs next to it. A couch that had probably been somebody's grandmother's. Photos on the walls of people who looked like Megan around the eyes. She walked through the place like someone who knew where things were. She set her bag down in the kitchen and went straight to the cabinet above the sink for 2 mugs. She opened the right drawer for the spoons on the first try. She didn't look around the way you look around when you're staying somewhere that isn't yours. I asked her how often she came up here. She said, pretty often. She said her uncle had health stuff, and she helped him out with the place. I said that was nice of her. She said it wasn't a big deal. The coffee pot was already half full. She poured both of us a mug, and the coffee that came out of it was warm, but not hot. She didn't comment on that. She didn't put the pot back on the burner to reheat it. She just poured it and handed me a mug and walked into the front room with hers. The dish rack next to the sink had 2 plates in it, 2 forks, and 2 mugs. One of the mugs was the same as the one she'd just handed me. I was standing in the kitchen by myself for about 10 seconds while she settled onto the couch in the next room. That was when I noticed the dish rack. I noticed it, and then I made myself stop noticing it. Because if I kept noticing things, I was going to have to do something with what I was noticing, and I didn't want to do anything, yet. I was 19, and I didn't want to be the guy who got weird and bailed. She showed me upstairs. There were 3 bedrooms. Hers, she said, was the small one at the top of the stairs. Her uncle's was the big one at the front of the house. She told me to take the one at the end of the hall, which had a twin bed and a small window that looked out into the trees behind the house. The bed was made. The pillow had a dent in it. I looked at the dent, and I told myself her uncle had probably had a guest a few weeks ago. People don't always strip beds. People don't always notice pillows. I was already getting tired of having this argument with myself, and we'd been there less than an hour. I put my bag on the floor next to the bed. The closet door was open about 2 inches. I'm a person who closes closet doors automatically, the way some people automatically straighten picture frames. I noticed it because of that. I pushed it open the rest of the way to put my jacket on a hanger, and there was a duffel bag on the floor of the closet. It wasn't hers. It was a man's duffel, zipped and packed, the size somebody throws in a truck for a weekend. Megan was already going back down the stairs. I closed the closet door without putting my jacket in it. I came back down, and she was on the couch with a blanket pulled over her legs. She patted the cushion next to her. I sat down. We talked for a while about people from high school, who had moved where, who was still around, who had gotten married already, which felt insane to both of us. She laughed at things I said. She touched my arm once when she laughed. The light was good. The wood stove was throwing heat into the room. The coffee was finally hot because she'd put the pot on the burner. I was having a good time. When I tell you what I noticed next, I had reasons I'd already decided on for why every single thing I'd noticed was nothing. The rifle rack in the front room had 4 pegs and 3 rifles on it. I noticed it because she got up to go to the bathroom, and I was sitting alone for a minute, and my eyes drifted. The rack was on the wall above the wood stove. 3 rifles, hanging on 3 pegs, each peg with a thin layer of dust around where the rifle sat against the wall. The 4th peg had no dust on it at all. A gun had come off that rack recently enough that the dust hadn't come back yet. I told myself her uncle had probably taken it with him. People take guns places. People go hunting. People keep one in the truck. I told myself this while I sat on her uncle's couch in her uncle's house, drinking her uncle's coffee. She came back from the bathroom and asked if I wanted to play cards. I said, yeah. I didn't think about my phone the way I should have. I checked it when we got to the house. No service. I'd known there wouldn't be service. She'd told me her uncle's place was deep enough that you got nothing, and I'd packed for that. I told my roommate not to expect to hear from me until Sunday night. I told my mom the same thing. What I didn't think about was the landline. Around 4 in the afternoon, I told Megan I should probably text my roommate that I'd gotten there because he worried, and could I use the house phone? She looked up from her cards and said, sure, it was in the kitchen, on the wall by the fridge. I went into the kitchen. The phone was an old beige cordless thing on a base. The base had a curly cord coming out the back of it that should have gone into the wall. The curly cord wasn't plugged into the wall. It was coiled up on top of the base, like someone had unplugged it and set the cord on top of the unit so they wouldn't lose it. I picked up the handset, and there was no dial tone. Of course there wasn't. I plugged the cord into the wall jack. The dial tone didn't come on. I unplugged it and plugged it back in to make sure it was seated. Nothing. She came into the kitchen behind me. She said, that's weird. Must be the line. She said it without looking at the phone. She said it looking at me. She said it with a small smile, the way you smile when you're sympathizing about a small, annoying thing. She said she thought maybe a tree had come down on the line a few weeks ago and it hadn't gotten fixed yet. She said her uncle didn't really use it anymore anyway. I said that made sense. I put the phone back. I went back into the front room with her. While she was telling me about the tree on the line, I was looking at the cord. The cord wasn't broken. The cord was unplugged and coiled. Someone had put their hands on that cord and unplugged it from the wall, and then put the cord on top of the base in a neat little spiral so they wouldn't lose track of it. A tree on the line outside doesn't unplug a cord inside. I knew that. I knew it while she was talking. I sat back down on the couch and picked up my cards anyway. It got dark. She made dinner. I helped her chop an onion. She got a knife out of the block, and I noticed she went for the second largest one, not the biggest, and I noticed her noticing me notice. She laughed and said the big one was too dull. She'd been meaning to sharpen it. The worst part of the whole thing is that knowing is not the same as leaving. I knew. I sat there with my hands full of onion, and I knew, and I did not get up and go. We ate at the kitchen table. She talked about her job. She'd been doing something with insurance. I don't remember now. After dinner, she said she was going to go change into something warmer, and we could watch a movie. She went upstairs. I heard her bedroom door close. I sat in the front room with the wood stove going. The house had that nighttime quiet you get in places that are far from other places. I could hear the stove ticking as it cooled in cycles. I could hear the wind in the trees behind the house. Then I heard something below me. It was a single sound. The sound of a foot coming down on a wood floor, and the floor giving. The way wood gives when there is weight on it, not the way wood gives when it's just settling. There was a basement under the house. The sound came from the basement. I sat very still. I waited for it to happen again so I could tell myself it was the stove, or the plumbing, or the house settling, or anything else but what I was starting to think it was. I heard the same sound again. A step in the same place, closer to where the basement stairs would be. There was a part of me that hoped Megan was about to walk back down the stairs and ask me if I'd heard it too, because if she heard it and she was scared, then the situation made sense. We were two people in a house, and there was something in the basement, and we would deal with it together. I heard her coming down the stairs from the second floor. She had changed into sweatpants and a hoodie. She had her phone in her hand. She walked into the front room and sat on the couch next to me, and she did not, at any point, glance toward the basement door. I said, "Did you hear that?" I said it as casually as I could. She looked up from her phone like I had asked her what time it was. She said, "The house makes noise. It's old." I waited. I was waiting for the third sound. I was waiting for her to hear it. I was waiting for her face to do something. The sound came a third time, closer than the first two. A step, and then the wood giving under it. She was looking at her phone. She did not look up. She put her phone down a minute later and said she was going to grab a quick shower before the movie. She said she'd be 10 minutes. She got up off the couch and she touched the back of my neck on her way past, and she went up the stairs, and I sat on the couch with the stove ticking and the wind outside and the basement under me, and I listened to the bathroom door close on the second floor and the water start running in the pipes. I sat there for what was probably about 30 seconds. I didn't decide to leave. I didn't have a plan. I had the sound of a foot coming down on a wood floor in a basement under me. And I had a girl in the shower upstairs who had heard it and not heard it. And I had a phone with no service and a landline with a coiled cord. And I had a duffel bag in a closet that wasn't mine. And a pillow with somebody else's dent in it. And a peg with no dust on it. I had all of that, and I had 30 seconds. And I sat on the couch and tried to decide if I was going to go upstairs and put my hand on the bathroom door and ask her to please come downstairs and explain a few things to me, or if I was going to wait for the movie and tell myself I was being insane. That was when the headlights came down the road. I saw the wash of them on the front window before I heard the engine. The road came in from the only open side of the property, and the front window of the house faced that road, and somebody was driving down it, slow. I got off the couch and went to the window. I pulled the curtain back about an inch. The truck was already parking in front of the house. It pulled up next to Megan's. 2 men got out. One of them, the one on the driver's side, looked up at the second floor of the house. He was looking at the corner where Megan's bedroom window was, not at the bathroom window. He waited a second, like he was waiting for someone to be at the window, and then he raised one hand, sort of half-mast, and gave a small wave. It was a wave between people who had already seen each other that day. The bathroom window was on the other side of the house. He couldn't see her in the shower from where he was standing. He was waving at the house, at someone he expected to be inside it. I let the curtain fall back. I was standing in the middle of the front room, with my heart doing something I'd never felt my heart do before. This hard, dull pounding that I could feel in my jaw. And my body started moving before I had a thought in my head about what to do. I went to the bedroom at the end of the hall. I picked up my bag. The water was still running on the second floor. I came back down. I went to the back of the house. There was a door off the kitchen that led out onto a little screened porch, and from there, onto the backyard. I'd seen it earlier and registered it without thinking about it. I went out that door. I heard the front door open behind me as the back door was closing. I heard a man's voice in the front room, low and calm, saying, "Hey now." I heard her voice come down from the second floor over the railing. She didn't sound surprised, and she wasn't in a hurry. She just said, "Give me 1 second." I went off the porch and into the trees. Parts of the next few hours don't come back to me in any order I can give you. I went into the trees behind the house. I didn't run yet. I walked because I didn't want to make noise. I went uphill at first because the slope behind the house was steep and the brush was thick, and I could put trees between me and the house quickly. After I was maybe 100 yards up, I crouched down behind the trunk of something big, and I looked back. The kitchen light was on. The porch light came on while I watched. A man stepped out onto the porch. I couldn't see his face from where I was, and I didn't try. I made myself small behind the tree. He stood on the porch and looked out into the trees. He didn't have a flashlight. He just looked. He stood there for what felt like a long time and was probably less than a minute. Then I heard him whistle. It was 2 notes. The second one, higher than the first. From somewhere on the other side of the house, off in the trees on the far side of the property, somebody whistled back. Same 2 notes. I am not a person who has been hunted. I had never been in a situation in my life where another human being was actively trying to find me and do something to me. I had nothing to compare it to. But the sound of those whistles answering each other across that property is the sound my body now uses for the word afraid. If somebody asks me what afraid feels like, I don't think of a feeling. I think of those 2 notes coming back from the other side of the trees. I started moving again. I didn't run. Running makes noise. I walked, fast as I could without snapping anything, and I went uphill and away from the house. A branch went under my foot, and the snap carried in a way I wasn't expecting. I froze with my weight half shifted, and I waited for the answering whistle. None came. I made myself move again, slower this time. I crossed a small drainage, and my boot caught on something on the bank, and I went down on one knee in the water. The cold came up my pants leg before I could stand. I scrambled up the other side with mud on my hands, and I felt a glove come off my hand on the way up the bank. I did not turn around to look for it. There was no version of going back into that drainage that I was willing to do. My hands were so cold by then, I couldn't feel them. I had bag straps in my fingers, and I couldn't tell I was holding anything. I almost went back. There was a part of me that thought I had read everything wrong, that I was going to come stumbling out of the woods at 4 in the morning, and Megan and her cousin or her uncle's friend or whoever were going to look at me like I had lost my mind, and I would be the guy who freaked out and ran into the trees because of a wave. I almost turned around. I want to be clear that I almost turned around. What stopped me was hearing someone walking on a parallel line, about 30 yards downhill from me, going the same direction I was going. Whoever it was wasn't behind me. They were on the slope beside mine, and they were keeping pace. I stopped behind a tree, and the steps stopped. Not right away, about 2 beats after mine, like somebody who was pretending not to be following you and didn't quite time it right. I waited. The wind came through the trees, and I could hear my own breathing, and I could hear the creek I'd crossed, and I could not hear them, but I knew they were there. I cut my line uphill, away from the slope they were on. I went maybe 10 yards and stopped behind another tree. The steps came again, adjusting to me, then a whistle, closer this time, 2 notes. I started moving again, and I made my body small, and I went over the ridge and down the other side, and I did not stop walking until the gray came up in the sky. I came out at a 2-lane road around 5 in the morning. I don't know how far I'd walked. I had 1 bar on my phone, and I used it to call my roommate and ask him to look up where I was, because I wasn't sure. He pulled up the map, and he told me the name of the road, and he asked me what was going on, and I told him I'd tell him later, and I sat on the gravel shoulder with my pack between my knees, and I waited. A truck came by around 6. The driver was a guy probably in his 50s, with a feed cap and a thermos in the cup holder. He pulled over. I told him my car had broken down. He asked where my car was. I said, "Back up the road." He looked at me for a few seconds longer than was comfortable, and then he said, "Get in." He drove me 40 minutes to a gas station that had a Hardee's attached to it. He didn't ask any more questions. When I got out, I tried to give him $20, and he waved me off and drove away. I waited at that gas station until the sun was all the way up, and then I called an Uber and went back to where Megan and I had met the day before. My car was where we'd left it. There was a leaf on the windshield. I got in, and I drove home. I drove 4 hours with the radio off. I got back to my mom's house at 1 in the afternoon, and I went upstairs to my old bedroom, and I closed the door, and I sat on the floor with my back against the bed for a long time before I did anything else. Megan's text came in at 9:14 that morning. I was probably an hour into the drive home when I heard my phone buzz. "Hey, where did you go? I came down and you weren't there. Did I do something? Please, call me when you can." I read it 3 times in the parking lot of a Sheetz off the interstate, and then I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and I drove the rest of the way without picking it up. I never called her. I never texted her back. I blocked her number that night. I blocked her on Instagram and on everything else. I told my mom I'd had a fight with the friend I'd gone to see, and I didn't want to talk about it. She was nice enough not to push. I thought about the police a lot in the weeks after. I'd sit at my desk at school, and I'd open the search bar, and I'd type in the name of the county where Megan's uncle lived, and I'd close the tab. The thing I kept running into was that I didn't have a story. A girl invited me to a cabin. I heard a sound. I saw 2 men get out of a truck. I left through the back door. There was nothing I could put in front of a person in a uniform that would sound like a crime had been committed. There was nothing I could even put in front of myself that would prove I hadn't read the whole thing wrong. I told one friend that whole school year. He listened to the entire thing, and he didn't say anything for a long time. And then he said quietly that he thought she'd set me up. I said I knew. He said, "But you don't really know." I said, "No, I don't really know." He said, "That's the part that would mess me up the most." I said, "Yeah." I said, "That's the part." I didn't see her again for about 2 years. This past June, I went to a wedding for a guy I'd been on the swim team with in high school. It was at one of those barn venues, an hour outside town. Open bar, a band, a lot of people I half remembered. Around 10 at night, I was at a high top with a girl I used to sit 2 seats away from in a math class my junior year. We were catching up. She was telling me about the last time she'd seen our old algebra teacher in a Kroger parking lot. We were laughing about it. She started telling me about a friend of hers from a different school she'd gotten close with the summer after we all graduated. The friend had been in a rough spot, had needed a change, had taken a trip up to her aunt's place in the mountains for a few weeks to clear her head. She said the friend never came back from that trip. She said the family had looked for her for a long time. She said it had been years now, and there were no answers. I asked the friend's name. She told me. It wasn't a name I knew. I asked if she had a picture. She said she did. She pulled it up on her phone and turned the phone toward me. It was a picture of 2 girls on a porch in summer light. The girl on the left, the one with her arm around the other one, was Megan. The girl on the right was the friend who had gone to her aunt's place in the mountains and not come back. I asked when the picture was taken. She said it was from the week before her friend left. I asked if her friend had gone alone. She said no. She said her friend had gone with somebody from her high school, a girl she didn't really know.
If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing. There's always another one coming.